Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around it's Science Fiction Saturday again, and I've got 3 science fiction movies for you which aren't very good but are entertaining. They're all from the 60s and 70s. They're all very much B pictures, and they're all weird in a good way. One's from 1960, 2 are from 1973. So let's get started. We'll do the 1961 first. We'll do them more or less chronologically. It's a weird little American science fiction movie which was made in about 8 days. Probably a bit of post-production there with the special effects, but the principal photography was about 8 days. It's a little piece of wonder called 12 to the Moon, which is about 12 international scientists going to the moon, surprisingly enough. Now, first off, I'm going to tell you flat out, too many cast members. Way too many cast members. Well, I would have been happy with 5 or 6 to the moon, to be honest with you. But 12 to the moon seems excessive, and there are a lot of cast members that don't get a lot of dialogue and definitely don't get any character development. Among the cast, you've got people like Tom Conway, who was the brother of George Sanders. You get Anthony Dexter, who played Valentino in a movie in the early 1950s and was also in Fire Maidens from Outer Space in the 1950s. You get Ken Clark as the captain of the crew. Ken Clark was an interesting actor for a couple of reasons, one of which was he played Stew Pot in South Pacific, the big Rodgers and Hammerstein musical in the 50s. But in the 1960s, he went on to Europe and did a series of James Bond pastiche movies about a secret agent called 007, and they're quite good. I've talked about them a bit on the channel when I did my Eurospy video years ago. But Ken Clark, nice piece of beefcake. As far as being an actor's concerned, less so, but he had a good look about it. The movie starts really weirdly. All the astronauts are introduced in a weird way, as if for a television interview. They're all brought forward on a foggy background. Their characters introduced, what they do on the spaceship, which nationality they represent, and then they move forward. So it's a really weird film noirish look they give to this part of it, and there's a reason for that, but I'll talk about that in a moment. So they get aboard the spaceship, and I love the spaceship. The spaceship design is quite generic, very 1950s, 1960s. It may be a reused set from other movies, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it may well be. And the cool thing is that at least some of the couches for the launch are actually banana lounges, those old banana lounges with the plastic straps on them. I kind of like that. I like repurposed other furniture in science fiction space movies. So they've got banana lounges for some of the couches. They've also brought animals on board. They've got a spaniel for some reason. They've got a couple of spider monkeys, because I think every movie studio had like 300 spider monkeys just waiting for a movie role. And they have 2 cats in Perspex containers. The cats are important to the plot, oddly enough. But I kind of thought about that going, okay, you've got 2 cats in quite small Perspex containers. It's going to take a few days to get them in, a few days back. And there's no cat litter. That's a recipe for olfactory disaster. Nonetheless, they've got the cats there, and the cats are important to the plot. So the crew go to the moon. They do the usual thing where you've got to dodge around a meteor storm and find a way to avoid it. They find a way to blast a path through the meteor storm. The rocket itself doesn't look terribly bad. I'll give them that. Not perfect, but not shabby either. They get the moon and land, of course, and they have a very limited set. They don't have tremendous vast vistas. It's not at the level of something like Destination Moon. And here's where the secret sauce comes in. And there is a secret sauce in this little film. The cinematographer was John Alton. For those of you who know, John Alton was the man who gave the look to so many classic films noir in the 1940s and 1950s. Movies like The Big Combo, for instance. And they repurpose his skills with light and shadow to make the lunar sets look bigger. There are vast shadowy parts in the sets hiding the limitations of them. It looks really good. Even the spaceship is lit really well. And having John Alton as the cinematographer just was a genius move. Obviously his career hadn't gone on fantastically since he was doing the film noir, and it's only in retrospect we now respect and delight in the work he did, using deep shadows and lights and contrast in that kind of chiaroscuro style. And it works for this movie. I think the movie looks a lot better than it would otherwise because of John Alton's work on the cinematography. And also they would have had to shoot faster. Having a cinematographer who could whack the lights in really quickly, bam, get things done, was a big advantage to them. 8 days filming isn't a lot. So they get to the moon and they start getting these odd messages with hieroglyphics, which, oddly enough, the female Japanese crew member can interpret. And so she does the audio interpretation and finds out that it's a message from the coordinator of the moon, all the moon people speak telepathically. And the coordinator of the moon is telling them to bugger off. They don't, because they travelled a long way. They're going to at least grab some rocks and look around. And the moon people are never seen, which I like. You don't have to show your aliens all the time. You just have to find some way of conveying them and conveying their alienness. So all of the crew go out for a little bit of a hike. One of them gets caught in some quicksand or some moon dust quicksand kind of stuff, because every adventure film of the time at some stage or other has quicksand. Tom Conway's character is a bit stupid, really, because for some reason the lunar explorers shoot a mortar into a wall where they know there are minerals, and some liquid starts pouring out. So Tom Conway's character goes over there, sticks his hands in it, and sure enough, it's molten silver, and he gets severe burns on his hands even through the gloves. Tip to any lunar explorers out there: if you see something weird, don't touch it. It's just a rule of thumb. Everybody should know, but it doesn't hurt to mention these safety precautions. They also find some gold and some glowing rocks, one of which they take back to the ship and ends up bursting into flames because oxygen makes it burst into flames. They have a bit of an avalanche on the moon too, and the cool thing is that the lunar rocks fall in slow motion. Yeah, the moon's gravity is 1/6 of ours. So they do get a little bit of the science right. And meanwhile, these telepathic moon people, whom you never see, are studying them. And they're also studying the animals on board, and they're fascinated by the cats. So they say to the humans, and quite rightly, I would do this as well if I were the moon people: you can go, but leave us the cats. And so they leave the cats and take off again. By the way, all of the people travelling on the moon's surface don't have any face plates to their helmets, but there's a little bit of a scientific talk during the preparations to go on the extravehicular activity, saying that they've got force fields around them that'll keep the oxygen in and that will protect them from micrometeorites. So at least they knew they didn't have any face plates for their masks, and they did a workaround in the dialogue, and I kind of like that. I approve of that kind of thing, going, yes, we know this science isn't accurate, but we're going to give you a little bit of a techno-babble to cover it. Points to them for that. So they head back to Earth and find out that the Northern Hemisphere, but only Canada, the USA, and Mexico, get covered by a chilling fog that freezes all of that landmass. All of North America gets frozen. And the astronauts on the fly, literally on the fly, decide what they're going to do is they're going to drop a whole bunch of nuclear bomblets into a volcano in Mexico to thaw out North America. I'm not making this up. This is what happens. Two of the crews sacrifice themselves gallantly to do that, but then the aliens contact them again and go, we've seen the self-sacrifice and the selflessness and the virtue of human beings. So we're going to thaw out North America, and surprise, all the people are actually only in suspended animation. So everybody is hunky-dory, even though their lawns are going to be very soggy for a couple of years. That's 12 to the Moon. It's a mad movie. Now, there is a colorized version of this, which is on Tubi, I believe. You can watch that if you like, but my advice, as a film buff, and as your friend, don't watch the colorized version because it's going to root John Alton's cinematography. Go with the black and white and just watch those deep blacks that you got in there. And that beautiful lighting that John Alton does for this mediocre, in every other way, production. It's a weird film, and they throw in that aliens freezing North America plotline in the last 10 minutes of the movie. It's deeply weird, but I like it for that. I like the cinematography. I like the weirdness of it. I like the way they use smart thinking to cover scientific inaccuracies and to cover the limitations of the sets and to cover the fact that they're run and gun shooting this over 8 days. It's a lot of fun, and respect to them for that. Not a great science fiction movie, not a great movie as far as plot, character, or anything else is concerned, but it knows what it is, and it tried to respect the genre in a really weird way. So points for that. It gets somewhere between a 3 and a 5 on IMDb, I forget which, but still very low. Nonetheless, I've got to give it at least a modicum of respect. 12th of the Moon, watch it on Tubi. You can probably find copies of it on YouTube, because you can find copies of everything that doesn't have anything saucy in it on YouTube. Next up, we'll do 1973's movie Ssss, which has 7 S's in it. That's the title of the movie. And if you're an ophidiophobe, you're not going to like this one, because it's full of snakes. It stars Strother Martin, Dirk Benedict, who was in the A-Team playing Faceman, Heather Menzies, Richard B. Shaw, and Reb Brown, who played Captain America in those TV movies as a school bully. This is a freaky film. I saw it in the cinemas when it came out, and it's mad in a kind of weird, low-key way. It was directed by Bernard L. Kowalski, who did a lot of TV work, and it's got a very much a TV movie look about it. But the thing here is, the producers, Zanuck and Brown, 2 years later, were the executive producers on Jaws. These guys leveled up and did the movie with Spielberg that ended up creating the summer blockbuster craze. And they didn't look back from there. They made a shit ton of money from it. But to get back to this one, Strother Martin plays Dr. Stoner, who is a herpetologist. He's a lizard and snake guy. And we see him at the start of the movie selling something in a cage to a carnival owner, played by Tim O'Connor. We later find out what that is, and it's not pretty. And then he gets a university student as an assistant, a guy called David, played by Dirk Benedict. He sees Dr. Stoner's daughter, Christina, played by Heather Menzies, and they have a little bit of a rapport, and so they kind of work towards starting a relationship. Dr. Stoner immediately gives David an injection, saying it's an anti-venin thing, so you got to get bitten by snakes working here, so you need to have this jab. So he gives him the jab, and then he shows him how to milk snakes. And you see Strother Martin milking a real snake. Whoever was doing the animal work on this taught the actors how to handle snakes, and props to them for that. And Strother Martin does a really good job of getting the thing out of the tank, pinning its head down, grabbing it behind the jaws, and milking it onto one of those membranes over a beaker. And I like that. I like the fact that they go, okay, we're going to get actors who aren't scared of snakes. We're going to train them up. We're going to let them do things. We're going to put them near a king cobra. And the king cobra is a major plot point in this. Now, Dr. Stoner has a pet constrictor called Harry, who he puts in his car to look after the car when he's not in it. That has an encounter with a petrol station attendant, which is kind of fun. And ultimately, Reb Brown's school bully stomps Harry to death. And Dr. Stoner decides to get revenge on him by dropping a small but very venomous snake into his shower. After his injection, David starts hallucinating weird medieval symbols and all sorts of other things, and things of the flesh. It's trying to do a little bit of Cronenberg without having the balls of Cronenberg, having a little bit as a body horror thing here. And he starts having side effects. He gets skin peeling and things like that. He starts feeling weird. And Dr. Stoner says, yeah, this is normal, don't worry about it. Here's another injection. So he keeps getting injected even while he is starting this romance with Christina. Christina eventually finds out that the previous assistant her father had, a guy called Tim, is now a sideshow freak, a half man, half snake. Because Dr. Stoner, who talks a lot about Christian apocalyptic mythology, he's decided that the human race is not going to survive unless they become cold-blooded creatures, and that God is going to smite them with an apocalypse of some kind. He really is messed up in several different ways. He's also tried to police his daughter's sexuality even though she's an adult, which is, again, a very 1970s movie thing, but still leaves a bad taste in the mouth of a modern audience. Inevitably, things progress and things get bad, and the movie ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. We don't quite see what happens at the end. Things go to shit. There's another subplot with a university professor's friend, or at least rival, of Dr. Stoner, played by Richard B. Shaw, who has an interesting ending in this film. That bit, which has got a little bit in common with some of the traps Jigsaw does in the Saw movies, is weird and works in the craziest way. I love that little subplot. It has a lot of balls to it. It's just a bold move, and it's a crazy move, and they make it work. Now, Strother Martin was good at playing nutcases like this, and I like him in this one as well. He gives Dr. Stoner a strangeness, but a plausibility. He's good at getting people to do what he wants. Heather Menzies, who was in Sound of Music as one of the Von Trapp kids back in the day, does pretty well as Christina. Dirk Benedict, in I think his first film role, does pretty well playing the gormless David, who really should look into the health and safety precautions that should be taken by his new job as an assistant to a herpetologist, but doesn't because he's too busy chatting up the doctor's daughter. It's just a weird little film. I'm not sure what they were aiming at, but they kind of landed it. The special effects on transformation sequences aren't great. They are very 1970s. They're about as good as some of the transformation things in movies like Phase 4, and they've got a bit of the same look. The practical effects makeup was partly done by John Chambers, who had done the flexible latex work on the original Planet of the Apes. Tim, the previous assistant to Dr. Stoner, looks really freaky in the scenes we see him in the carnival. Tim was actually played by an actor called Noble Craig, who'd been in Vietnam. He was a Vietnam veteran who stepped on either a mine or an artillery shell and lost both of his legs and one arm and the vision in one of his eyes. So playing the very much a bit Todd Browning's freakish Tim as a snake man was very effective because of the disabilities that Noble Craig had. And he played a number of different creatures in a few movies during his career. But 7S, I'm going to call it 7S. But 7S is one of those B pictures that were in double features in the 1970s that you remember if you saw it when you were young. Because the premise, a mad scientist injecting people with some kind of serum to turn them into snakes, is really fun. It's definite drive-in popcorn B-picture 1970s in the best possible way. If you haven't seen it or you haven't seen it for a while, I recommend you sit down, grab yourself a brew and some popcorn or some beef jerky. Just ride the crazy train of this 1970s science fiction mad scientist movie. And that takes us to the third movie, which I warn you has female nudity in it. You're not going to see anything in this review because I don't want the video demonetized, but I'm just telling you what's in there. And again, this is one I saw in the cinemas back in the day in my misspent youth. And it's called Invasion of the Bee Girls, which is a great title. For some odd reason, known only to movie distribution companies in the UK. In England, it was called Graveyard Tramps, which sounds like a zombie or a vampire movie, but this isn't either of those. We'll go through the cast first. William Smith, the great William Smith, who has been in any number of cult films, plays a government agent called Neil Agar. Yes, it is a reference to John Agar, who comes to investigate the death of a couple of scientists at a government-funded lab in California, where they've died unexpectedly of what appear to be coronary occlusions. He strikes up a friendship and a potential romance with Julie Zorn, played by Victoria Vetri, who's the librarian at this particular facility. There are a number of scientists working in this facility, and they're all players. All the guys are players. They're very much into extracurricular activities that their wives don't know about. And there is a beautiful female scientist called Dr. Susan Harris, played by Anitra Ford, who has her own side hustle in this facility. And the side hustle is this. She's turning women into queen bees, basically into human bee hybrids. And these human bee hybrids are looking to take over the world and populate it. We don't get a lot of insight into her reasons for doing this, but she does. And the problem is that when they do procreate, because of this being human bee hybrids whose eyes turn into compound eyes when they're aroused, the men they sleep with die with a smile on their face in some cases. So Neil Agar and Julie Zorn investigate this weird coincidences of death that are happening in this town around this particular research facility. There's some really fun scenes in this. There's a scene where the sheriff, played by Cliff Osmond, who was also a acting teacher as much as he was a character actor, he plays the local sheriff. They do a town meeting where they tell the townspeople, we're not sure what this is, but we think it's venereal. So don't sleep with anybody because you can die, guys. And you get a bunch of the guys going, no, it's to hell with you. I'm going to sleep with who I like. Some of them die because of this. Now, the other thing with the bee girls, we'll call them the queen bees because bee girls sounds a little bit infantilizing about the women involved, is that they're infertile. they're trying to overcome that by doing more research. And we see lots of women suddenly walking around with large sunglasses on in case their eyes turn into compound eyes unexpectedly. And they're all beautiful women. We see one of the transformation sequences where one of the future B-girls is jabbed in the forehead with a bit of a sedative by Dr. Ford. She undresses. She's covered in what seems to be some kind of beeswax or beeswax honey combination. And then she's put in a chamber with a whole bunch of bees and irradiated so that she becomes a B-girl. And then all of this muck is stripped off her, and lo and behold, she's got perfect makeup, she's beautiful, and she is, let's just put it politely, easily aroused. It's partly there for the titillation, it's partly there for the mad scientist in this case being a beautiful woman, and it's partly there because it's a crazy action film. There are a couple of scenes that don't land well to a modern audience, one of which involves a bunch of townspeople attempting a assault on Julie, and that's problematic and really doesn't move the plot line forward in any way. It's purely there for the prurience. So that scene could possibly go. But the other thing about the film that I like is it was written by Nicholas Meyer, who a few years later went on to do some writing jobs. His novel, The 7% Solution, was made into one of the better Sherlock Holmes films of the late 20th century with Nicole Williamson and Robert Duvall. And also he happened to write Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. So everybody's got to start somewhere, and Nicholas Meyer started out with this 1973 kind of T&A science fiction mad scientist movie, which isn't great but is kind of intriguing in a way. Blame it on my youth at the time I first saw it, but I like this film. I've got a copy of it. I've got a DVD copy of it under the title of Graveyard Tramps that I picked up from Amazon back in the day. But Invasion of the Beagles, which has a good poster, I love the poster on this as well, but Invasion of the Beagles is one of those drive-in era movies that if you saw it at that impressionable age, you're going to like. You may well like it now if you can put your head in the right space for it. It's still a lot of fun, and William Smith, who normally played villains, except in some TV roles he had, he was the main antagonist in Darker Than Amber, the Travis McGee movie that Rod Taylor did, which is screaming for a Blu-ray release, and still MGM haven't released it to anybody for distribution, which is a great shame. So there are the three movies, one from 1960, two from 1973. All of them are very much B pictures. All of them are basic in some ways, but all of them are entertaining if you look into them just a little deeper than most people do. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, hit the notification bell. You can support the channel by becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/cherrytalksmovies. I've got some new releases from Imprint I'm going to talk about next time around, which are very interesting. 1940s, 1950s stuff, which are hidden gem rarities. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some movies with bees and snakes and space trips in them, and I'll catch you next time.